Everything is under control, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything else you need? No, thank you.
Welcome back to EchoStory, where real drama meets real consequences. The moment a woman's entitled demand goes viral is the moment her entire world collapses. Flight 347 was departing San Francisco International Airport on a Tuesday morning when a first-class passenger named Victoria Lane spotted someone sitting in what she believed was her seat. The woman sitting there was in her early 70s, with silver gray hair pulled into a simple braid, wearing a modest cream-colored sweater and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Victoria, dressed head to toe in designer brands costing more than a luxury car, felt her blood pressure rise. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "You're in my seat." The older woman looked up calmly, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's with an unexpected steadiness that made the younger woman feel oddly unsettled. "I have seat 1A reserved and paid for," Victoria announced, pulling out her boarding pass with theatrical flair. Her nails, painted a deep crimson, trembled slightly with indignation. "I don't know how you got into first class, but there's clearly been a mistake. This is for Diamond members and premium passengers only." The woman smiled sadly, as if recognizing something in Victoria's words that the younger woman herself could not see. "My seat is one as well," the woman replied softly, tapping her own boarding pass. Victoria's face flushed red, not with embarrassment, but with rage. Around them, other passengers began to notice the commotion. A businessman in Tubi sat down his newspaper. A young couple in 3 exchanged uncomfortable glances. The flight attendant, Marcus, a man in his 30s with an exhausted expression, moved toward them with practiced caution. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Victoria spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "My husband is a federal judge. My father owns commercial real estate across 3 states. I have connections at this airline, and I will have you removed immediately if you don't get out of this seat voluntarily." She didn't wait for a response. Instead, she flagged down Marcus aggressively. "Flight attendant, I need to speak to the purser and then the captain. This woman needs to be relocated to the back of the plane where she belongs." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had worked in the airline industry for 14 years, and he had encountered countless passengers like Victoria Lane, wealthy passengers who believed their money gave them the right to demean anyone they deemed beneath them. "Mrs. Lane," he said carefully, using her name from the passenger manifest. "Ms. Patterson has a valid boarding pass for this seat. I cannot move her based on your preference." Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief, as if Marcus had just told her the earth was flat. "Did you just refuse me?" she asked incredulously. "Do you have any idea how many flights I take annually with this airline? Do you understand the implications of poor service?" She turned to face the other passengers, playing to an audience she believed would sympathize. Unbelievable. This is what customer service has become. She's clearly a staff member using a discounted pass, or perhaps she won in some lottery giveaway program. Miss Patterson, the woman in seat 1A, had returned her attention to her book. She was reading a worn copy of Maya Angelou's autobiography. The pages yellowed with age and love. She didn't respond to Victoria's insults. She didn't argue or defend herself. She simply turned another page with deliberate slowness, as if demonstrating a masterclass in dignity and composure. Within 5 minutes, Captain James Wellington emerged from the cockpit. He was a tall black man with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and respect. His uniform was impeccable, his presence commanding. Victoria immediately launched into her tirade, gesticulating wildly. Captain, thank goodness you're here. There's been a massive error. This woman is clearly not supposed to be in first class. She's disrupting the entire cabin. I've already lost productivity time, and my patience is wearing thin. Captain Wellington listened with a neutral expression, his eyes moving from Victoria to Miss Patterson. When his gaze landed on the older woman, something shifted. His hand, which had been resting casually at his side, froze. His breathing became shallow. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked as if he might need medical attention. For a full 10 seconds, Captain Wellington stared at Miss Patterson without speaking. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Miss Patterson, noticing his reaction, set down her book very slowly. She removed her reading glasses and folded them into her lap with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she had been expecting this moment for a very long time. James, she said softly. Her voice carried layers of history, of relationships spanning decades, of secrets and promises and roads not taken. It's been quite some time. Victoria looked between them, her sense of triumph beginning to curdle into confusion. You know her? She demanded, stepping closer to the captain. Then you can tell her that she doesn't belong here. Go ahead, Captain. Confirm it. But Captain Wellington wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. His eyes were locked on Miss Patterson's face, as if he were seeing a ghost, or a memory made flesh. Captain Wellington's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. Miss Patterson, I ... He paused, and every person in the first-class cabin seemed to be holding their breath. I didn't realize you still flew. Why? Why didn't you tell me you were coming aboard my flight? Miss Patterson smiled gently. Would you have believed me, James? Would you have wanted to acknowledge the connection? This cryptic exchange only deepened Victoria's confusion and frustration. Okay, what is this? Who is she? Why are you speaking? To her like you know her personally? Captain Wellington took a deep breath, and when he looked at Victoria, his expression had transformed. Where there had been professionalism, there was now something harder, something angry. Mrs. Lane? Captain Wellington said coldly, let me introduce you to someone. This is Dr. Judith Patterson. She is not only a passenger with a valid first-class ticket. She is a retired aeronautical engineer. She worked for the Federal Aviation Administration for 42 years. She was one of the primary engineers who designed the safety protocols used in commercial aviation today. She's probably saved more lives in her career than you and your entire family have influenced in your lifetime. Victoria's face went absolutely blank. Her mouth formed the word, what? But no sound emerged. Around them, the cabin had gone completely silent. Marcus, standing nearby, allowed himself the tiniest smile. The businessman in 2B had set down his newspaper entirely and was watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Captain Wellington continued, his voice steady and deliberate. Dr. Patterson also happens to have been my instructor when I attended the United States Naval Academy. She was one of the few women in her engineering program, one of the few black women in her field, and she broke barriers that most people couldn't even conceive of breaking. She mentored me through the most challenging period of my training. Without her guidance, I wouldn't be standing here as the captain of this aircraft. He paused, letting his words settle into the cabin like stones dropped into still water. And When I say she has earned the right to sit in any seat on any aircraft she chooses, I say that with the full knowledge and respect of someone whose career was built on her foundational work. Victoria's designer handbag slipped from her fingers and fell to the cabin floor with a soft thud. I didn't know, Victoria stammered, but the damage was already done. Marcus had quietly activated the cabin's recording system minutes earlier, and multiple passengers were already filming on their phones. The video would be uploaded to social media within hours. It would go viral within days. But in this moment, Victoria was only beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. I apologize. I just assumed double quotes, she began weakly. That's precisely the problem, Miss Patterson said, speaking for the first time directly to Victoria. You assumed. You saw a black woman in an expensive airline seat and decided that was impossible. You didn't ask, you didn't wonder. You assumed. And in that assumption, you revealed everything about yourself. Dr. Patterson's words were not delivered with anger. They were delivered with sadness, as if she were watching a particularly tragic performance. Victoria attempted to salvage the situation. She offered apologies that sounded hollow even to her own ears. She tried to retreat to her assigned seat, but the cabin had turned against her. A woman across the aisle muttered, "Absolutely disgusting." A man behind her said loudly, "Some people really have no shame." Victoria sank into her seat, feeling the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, condemning her. Captain. Wellington made a brief announcement to the cabin, thanking everyone for their patience and confirming that Dr. Patterson had indeed designed critical systems on the very aircraft they were flying in. The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained. By the time Flight 347 landed in Atlanta 4 hours later, hashtag first class racism was trending nationwide. The video of Victoria's demands, edited and re-edited into multiple versions, had accumulated 17 million views. News outlets were running segments about systemic racism in customer service industries. Civil rights organizations issued statements. Victoria's husband, federal judge Thomas Lane, received calls from colleagues questioning his judgment in his personal relationships. The airline issued a public statement commending Dr. Patterson for her grace and her historical contributions to aviation safety. Within 48 hours, Victoria's position as vice president of her family's real estate firm came under intense scrutiny. An internal audit was launched. Her history of demanding special treatment and verbal abuse toward subordinates, which had previously been tolerated due to her family connections, was suddenly magnified by the public attention. Several employees came forward with stories of her aggressive behavior, her casual racism, her tendency to belittle anyone she deemed beneath her station. The company's board met in emergency session. Victoria returned to her Manhattan penthouse to find her husband gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter in his neat handwriting. I cannot continue to be associated with this behavior. I have retained counsel. We will discuss the details through our lawyers. Her children refused to take her calls. Her mother, watching the viral video from her home in Boston, called to say that the family name had been dishonored, and that until Victoria demonstrated genuine change, she was no longer welcome at family gatherings. Victoria poured herself a glass of wine at 3 p.m. and sat alone in her luxurious, suddenly suffocating apartment. The real estate firm issued a press release distancing themselves from Victoria's actions and announcing her immediate dismissal from her position. Our company values diversity, inclusion, and respectful customer service, the statement read. The actions of Ms. Victoria Lane on Flight 347 do not reflect our corporate values. Within 2 weeks, Victoria had lost her job. Her marriage was effectively over, and her social circle had evaporated like morning fog. Former friends who had lunch with her weekly did not return her calls. Country club she had been a member of for 20 years quietly suggested she allow her membership to lapse. 6 months later, Victoria found herself working at a nonprofit organization that served low-income families in the Bronx. She had started as a volunteer, seeking redemption, seeking some way to begin making amends for the weight of her arrogance. She was stuffing envelopes and answering phones, work that paid minimum wage and held no prestige whatsoever. One afternoon, a woman came in seeking help with housing assistance. She was tired, worn down by the systems that had failed her repeatedly. Victoria was helping her through the application process when the woman suddenly said, "Wait, you're that woman from the airplane video? That's you, isn't it?" Victoria nodded slowly, expecting judgment, expecting more condemnation. The woman studied her for a long moment. "I've seen your interviews," she said finally. "The ones where you talk about what you learned, about how you were wrong. I appreciate that. A lot of people would never admit that. They'd just hire some PR firm and make it go away." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I was terrible," she whispered. "I had to sit with that every single day." The woman smiled. "Yeah, well, we're all terrible sometimes. The question is what you do with it. Are you still terrible? Or are you trying to do better? Looks like you're trying." That conversation, more than any article or interview, marked a turning point in Victoria's internal reckoning with her actions. A year after the incident, Victoria was working a community fundraiser when Dr. Judith Patterson arrived as a guest speaker. She had been invited to discuss her contributions to aviation safety and women's achievement in STEM fields. Victoria, who was volunteering at the event, felt her heart stop when she saw the older woman enter the room. Every instinct told her to hide, to disappear, to avoid a confrontation. Instead, she took a breath and approached. "Dr. Patterson," Victoria said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Victoria Lane from the airplane. I want to apologize not just for my words, but for the assumptions behind them. I've spent the last year trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would speak to another human being that way. And I've had to face some hard truths about my privilege and my prejudices." Dr. Patterson looked at this woman who had once been so full of contempt for her, who had demanded her removal from a seat she had rightfully purchased. She saw someone changed, not perfectly, but genuinely changed. "Apology accepted," Dr. Patterson said simply. "The work you're doing here, helping people who have been failed by systems that don't recognize their value, that's what matters now. Your mistake on that airplane wasn't the beginning of your transformation. It was an opportunity. What you do with opportunities is what defines you." As the two women shook hands in front of a room of witnesses, someone started to applaud. Soon, the entire room was clapping. Victoria wept, not from shame this time, but from the recognition that she had been given a second chance, and that she would spend whatever remained of her life being worthy of it. Dr. Patterson turned to the podium to deliver her speech about breaking barriers, about the power of persistence in the face of discrimination, about the importance of treating every human being with dignity regardless of their appearance. And as she spoke, Captain James Wellington, who was sitting in the audience wearing his uniform, nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had watched justice unfold exactly as it should.